After Richard passed 3 years ago, the house felt hollow in ways I could never have imagined. I kept myself busy at the library, shelving new arrivals and leading story hour, but silence always greeted me at the end of the day. The only voices I longed for were Daniel's and the children's. Kelsey sent photos sometimes, a birthday party, a school play, but distance grew where closeness used to be. Last winter, as Rochester's snow piled against the porch steps, I thought of warmth, of reunion, of a way to bring us back together. That was when the idea of Hawaii bloomed in me like a stubborn flower pushing through frost. I told myself one grand gesture could mend what time and grief had pulled apart. I booked the package in March, watching my savings balance drop by $25,000 in a single transaction. Flights for 4, a beachfront hotel in Maui, snorkeling tours, and even a family photography session. I imagined us on the sand, laughter spilling over the sound of the waves. I saw myself holding my granddaughter's hand as she pointed at sea turtles, felt the heat of the sun pressing the years of cold from my bones. It wasn't just about palm trees and beaches. It was about healing. After decades of teaching, saving, and careful planning, I could finally give something that mattered more than a check. A trip like this wasn't about duty. It was about love made visible. As I sealed the folder of itineraries, I felt lighter than I had in months. This was going to be the summer we remembered differently, the summer we started over. I dialed Daniel's number, my heart quickening with anticipation as the line began to ring. Daniel answered on the third ring. His voice hurried, as if I had interrupted something. I brushed it off, eager to hear excitement in him, maybe a little gratitude. So, I began, smiling to myself. "How's the planning going? I've been picturing us all together in Maui, the kids with their little sand buckets." There was a pause, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then his reply came, flat and almost irritated. "We already went last week, only for family." The words fell heavy, like a stone through glass. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, certain I had misheard. "You already went." "Yeah," he said, exhaling like it was nothing. "Kelsey handled it. Flights. Hotel, it's done. The kids loved it. Anyway, I'm busy. Mom. Only for family." The phrase echoed, cruel in its simplicity. I sat frozen at the kitchen table, staring at the folder of printouts I had kept safe like treasure. Family. Wasn't I the one who had wired the money, who covered the cost of the SUV when their old sedan quit on a snowy stretch of I-90? Who slipped them rent checks when Daniel was laid off from the call center in Syracuse? I thought of Kelsey's texts, always brief, always direct. "We're short this month. Can you cover the phone bill?" Each one answered with my yes. Each one signed with my quiet hope they would see I was trying to keep us whole. But this was different. This wasn't oversight or forgetfulness. This was deliberate. They had drawn a circle, placed themselves inside it, and left me on the outside, holding the receipt. My throat ached, but no words came. I hung up gently, as if ending the call with care might soften the break I felt inside. The snow outside had begun to melt, but I had never felt colder. That night, I opened my checkbook, the pages heavy with years of sacrifices, and began to tally what love had cost. I sat at the kitchen table with my old checkbook spread open, pages curling from years of use. The ink had faded in places, but the numbers were still there, lined up like a history book no one else would ever read. My phone buzzed against the table, the banking app opened to rows of transactions. Together, they told the story of my love in dollar amounts. Rent transfers when Daniel lost his job at the call center 6 months straight, $1, $200 each time. A cashier's check for $5,000 when their furnace broke midwinter. The $7, $400 SUV down payment so they could drive the kids safely to school. Groceries covered, utilities caught up, Credit card bills settled. Piece by piece, it added up to almost $80,000 over the last 6 years. And now the Hawaii trip, 25,000 more stacked on top. The numbers blurred as I traced them with my finger. I remembered standing in my own kitchen, staring at the cracked linoleum I had planned to replace after Richard passed. I had set that dream aside when Daniel called about needing new furniture. I remembered the cataract surgery my doctor said I shouldn't delay. Rescheduled twice because Kelsey insisted the children's orthodontist bill couldn't wait. I had told myself these were the choices a mother made, that I was keeping the family steady while Daniel found his footing. Each check had felt like stitching a torn seam, a way to keep the fabric from unraveling completely. But now I saw what I had really been doing, pulling thread after thread from my own life to patch theirs, until my side was bare and thin. I closed the checkbook and pushed the phone aside, the silence of the room pressing in. For the first time, I wondered if all those sacrifices had even registered, or if they had vanished the moment the deposit cleared. The folder with the Hawaii itinerary still sat on the counter, unopened since yesterday's call. I slid it into the drawer and shut it firmly, as though sealing away a mistake. The next morning, the phone rang again. Daniel's name flashing on the screen. 4 weeks passed in a blur of routine. I worked extra shifts at the library, shelved books until my back ached, and came home to evenings marked by silence. The folder with the Hawaii receipts remained hidden in the drawer, but the weight of it never left me. Each night, I wondered if Daniel would call, if some apology might come. It never did. Instead, on a gray Saturday morning, the phone lit up with his name. I hesitated, the sound of the ring drilling into the quiet room. Finally, I answered. "Mom," he said briskly, as though nothing had happened. "The rent's overdue. It's $2,000 this month. Can you cover it today?" I gripped the phone so tightly I thought it might crack. The audacity of it. The casual tone as if the Hawaii trip had never existed, as if I hadn't been erased. A chill steadied me. 2,000. I repeated slowly, measuring each word. Then I let the phrase that had burned in my chest for weeks rise to the surface. "Oh, only for family. Remember." The line went silent. For a beat, I thought he might soften, might realize the cruelty of what he'd said. Instead, I heard a sharp scoff, the rustle of movement on his end, and then the call dropped. My hands shook as I lowered the phone to the table. Tears welled, not just from pain, but from something sharper, almost electric. For the first time in years, I had not said yes. I sat there breathing hard, staring at the empty air where his voice had been. The silence didn't feel like punishment anymore. It felt like a boundary forming, fragile, but real. When the trembling eased, I reached for my checkbook again, not to write, but to close it. Tomorrow, I would go to the credit union. The morning after Daniel's call, I woke with a strange steadiness in my chest. The ache was still there, but underneath it ran a current of resolve. I dressed carefully, pulled on my winter boots, and drove downtown to Rochester Federal Credit Union. Inside, the heat fogged my glasses. I took a seat across from Ruth Callahan, who had handled my accounts for years. She greeted me with the same calm efficiency I remembered from the time Richard and I refinanced the house. "What can I do for you today, Miriam?" she asked. I slid a list across the desk. "I need to cancel every automatic transfer connected to Daniel. Rent, car insurance, phone, internet, everything." Ruth adjusted her reading glasses and began clicking through her terminal. $300 monthly for the Subaru insurance, $200 for the phone bill, $150 for internet, and the landlord's payment, $1,200 recurring. She looked up, waiting for my nod before removing each one. Every confirmation that flashed on her screen felt like another link falling away from my wrists. I breathed deeper with each cancellation. My shoulders, tight for months, began to ease. When Ruth finished, she folded her hands and studied me with quiet concern. "You're not cold," she said softly. "You're correcting the math. Love doesn't require debt." Her words nearly undid me, but I held my composure. I signed the final forms, my name flowing across the page steadier than I felt. Outside, the afternoon sky hung heavy, snow falling in slow, wet flakes onto East Avenue. I walked to my car without rushing, letting the cold air sting my face. The city seemed quieter than usual, as if it, too, recognized a shift inside me. I drove home with no music, just the sound of the heater humming. For the first time in years, the balance sheet of my life felt like it might finally belong to me. When night came, I slept without leaving the lamp on, the first unbroken rest I had known in months. The next test of my resolve arrived sooner than I expected, announced by the crunch of tires in my driveway. It was just after dusk when the headlights swept across my living room wall. I set my book aside, heart quickening. Through the curtains, I saw Daniel's car pulling into the drive, Kelsey in the passenger seat, and the children's silhouettes moving in the back. A hard knock rattled the door. I opened it only part way, the winter air spilling in. Daniel's face was tight with anger. "What are you doing?" "Mom, you cut off the transfers. The rent's due. The bills don't stop just because you decided you're done." Kelsey leaned forward, her voice sharp. "You've always helped us. You can't stop now, not when the kids depend on you." Their words carried down the street. I noticed curtains shifting in my neighbor's windows, curious eyes catching the scene. Heat rose in my chest, shame mixing with fury. For years I had been silent, writing checks without protest, hoping gratitude would come. It never had. I steadied myself against the doorframe, my hands trembling but my voice steady. "I've done more than my share. Family isn't a bill to collect. Not anymore." Daniel's eyes widened, as if he hadn't imagined I could say no. "You're being selfish," he snapped. "We're your blood. Doesn't that mean anything?" "It means everything," I said quietly. "Which is why it hurts so much to know I'm only valued for what I pay." For a moment, no one spoke. The cold wind cut between us. The children fidgeted in the back seat, and a pang of sorrow pierced me. Still, I stood firm. I closed the door slowly but firmly, the latch catching with a final click. My whole body shook, but I slid the deadbolt into place with steady fingers. On the other side, their voices rose in protest, muffled now, distant. I leaned my forehead against the wood, breathing hard. I had drawn a line, and this time I wasn't moving it. By the next morning, the confrontation had already begun to ripple outward in ways I hadn't foreseen, arriving first in the form of an envelope slipped through my mail slot. A week after the shouting on my porch, an envelope slid through my mail slot. The return address was a downtown law office I didn't recognize. My stomach knotted as I tore it open. Inside was a letter from an attorney representing Daniel and Kelsey. It claimed I had been acting erratically, that my sudden refusal to provide financial support suggested I was unfit to manage my own affairs. They were petitioning to review control of my assets. The words blurred as I read them, again and again. Unfit. Erratic. My own son had chosen to paint me as unstable. Not because I was, but because I had finally said no. 2 days later, there was a knock at the door. A woman in a gray coat introduced herself as a social worker. "We've received a report concerning your financial decisions," she said, her tone professional but wary. "I need to ask you a few questions." My hands shook as I ushered her in, but once seated, I steadied myself. I pulled out a folder I had begun preparing 3 decades of teaching records, pay stubs from the library, my retirement account statements, even letters of commendation from former principals. My life laid out in black and white, the proof of a woman who had worked hard, saved carefully, and lived responsibly. As she leafed through the documents, I dialed Henry Mora, an attorney recommended by a colleague at the library. He answered on the first ring, his voice calm. I explained what was happening, the lawyer's letter, the visit. He told me to hand the phone to the social worker. Ms. Warren is fully competent, Henry said firmly through the speaker. This is harassment, not concern. The social worker studied me, then the papers again. Her expression softened. Your records are solid, she admitted, jotting notes. I'll include this in my report. When she left, I sank into the couch, drained but clear-eyed. Daniel's attack wasn't about my mental state. It was about money he could no longer reach. I folded the lawyer's letter and tucked it into Henry's growing file, ready for whatever would come next. The courthouse summons arrived 3 weeks later. The Monroe County Courthouse was colder than I expected, its marble floors echoing each step as Henry guided me to our table. I kept my eyes on the wood grain of the bench before me, willing my heart to steady. Across the aisle, Daniel sat beside his lawyer, his jaw tight, Kelsey whispering furiously into his ear. He didn't look at me. When the session began, their attorney rose first. His voice was smooth, rehearsed. He painted me as unpredictable, unstable, a woman who had abruptly abandoned her family and left them in hardship. She has always been generous, he said, but her sudden withdrawal of support demonstrates erratic judgment. We believe oversight of her finances is necessary. Daniel was called to testify. He spoke of bills piling up, children suffering, and my supposed indifference. She's not herself, he said, eyes fixed on the judge. We just want to protect her. The words stung, not for their truth, but for the ease with which he twisted my care into neglect. A neighbor of theirs followed, repeating gossip about how I had suddenly cut ties. Henry objected, and the judge struck it from the record. Still, each word felt like another stone hurled in my direction. Then it was our turn. Henry laid out my teaching records, 30 years of steady employment, letters of commendation from principals, the pension plan I'd built with care. He presented my bank statements, highlighting consistent deposits and the canceled transfers that showed exactly where my money had gone. A psychiatrist I had agreed to see after the social worker's visit testified calmly that I was lucid, responsible, and fully competent. There is no evidence of erratic behavior, she stated plainly. Finally, it was my turn. I rose, my knees shaking, and faced the bench. I supported my son for years. I said evenly, rent, groceries, medical bills, even a vacation. I did it because I love him, but love doesn't mean letting yourself be emptied. Boundaries are not cruelty, they are survival. The courtroom hushed. The judge leaned forward, pen tapping once against the desk. Then he spoke, clear and final. The petition is dismissed. No credible evidence has been presented to suggest incapacity. Relief swept through me. But when I glanced at Daniel, he still would not meet my eyes. I walked out with Henry at my side, the cold February air biting sharper than ever, but also cleaner, as if it were clearing a space for what might come next. By spring, I had left the old house behind. The mortgage felt like an anchor I no longer needed, so I sold it and found a modest apartment downtown with wide windows overlooking the Genesee River. From my living room, I could watch the water move steadily east, carrying winter's melt toward Lake Ontario. It became my reminder that life, too, keeps flowing forward. Unpacking was easier than I expected. I brought only what mattered: Richard's books, a few pieces of sturdy furniture, and the quilt my mother stitched when I was a child. Everything else I donated. The rooms felt spare, but the space was my own. I filled my evenings with new routines. I signed up for a cooking class at the community center, where I laughed alongside strangers while we kneaded dough and learned the patience of risotto. For the first time in years, I planned a trip for myself alone, Boston, to attend a library conference. I walked cobblestone streets near Faneuil Hall, listened to lectures on preservation techniques, and even allowed myself an afternoon in a cafe with nothing but a notebook and time. Back home, journaling became a nightly ritual. Some entries were short lists of gratitude, the river view, the smell of bread cooling in the kitchen, the laughter of friends from book club. Others were longer, heavy pages where I tried to untangle grief from relief. Writing gave me space to set the past down without denying it. Through neighbors, I heard that Daniel and Kelsey had moved into a smaller rental on the edge of town. He was piecing together contract work. She had taken a part-time job at a daycare. I felt a pang of pity, but not regret. Their lives were theirs to carry now. One evening, I closed my journal and stood by the window, watching the river glint beneath the streetlights. My reflection stared back at me, steadier than before, as I reached to turn off the lamp and prepare for the next chapter waiting just ahead. By summer, my apartment felt lived in. Plants lined the windowsill, cookbooks stacked on the counter, and my journal sat open on the desk like an old friend. One Friday evening, I hosted my book club for the first time in the new space. Nadine brought cheese, Carol carried in a pie, and Teresa arrived with a bottle of red wine. We crowded around the small table, the city lights shining beyond the glass. When Carol raised her glass, she smiled at me. "To new beginnings," she said. The others echoed it, and for a moment I felt something warm and steady pass through me. Not obligation, not guilt, just friendship, freely given. Later, after the dishes were cleared and the laughter faded, I sat with my journal. I wrote slowly, letting the words take their shape. My worth is not measured in checks written or bills paid. It is not in vacations I never took or repairs I postponed. It is in who I am, in the life I build with my own two hands. The phrase Daniel once used only for family rose again in my mind. I had carried it like a wound, but now it settled differently. Family was not who demanded until nothing was left. Family was who respected boundaries, who offered presence without a price tag. I closed the journal. The quiet around me no longer heavy, but whole. The ledger of sacrifices lay behind me, balanced at last. Ahead stretched a space I had not known in years, mine to shape, mine to fill, mine to claim. The river moved steadily outside my window, and I knew I was ready to step into whatever future waited beyond its bend.